The sun over Las Piedras came down hard and white, turning the dust on Silver Mesa Road into a living glare. Heat held in the tin roofs and the mesquite leaves lay still. From town, the bell of St. Michael's clanged out of practice, a dull note that wobbled in the air. Inside the big house, a fan clicked without moving any wind. Harlan Vale stood in front of a tall mirror, a revolver in his hands and a cloth pinched between two fingers. He rubbed the cylinder until it shone. His collar was starched, his voice not. "Sundown," he said. "You marry him at sundown." Nora Vale stood at the doorway in her mother's blue dress, the seam at the hip gone soft with age. The lace had turned the color of watered milk. She felt the fabric and thought of the woman who had worn it, the shape the dress remembered better than it remembered her. "I will not," Nora said. Her voice was even. It made Harlan's cheek twitch. Vivian Vale watched from a settee with a lace fan open like a pale shell. Her smile did not lift the corners of her eyes. Not every girl gets to choose dear. Be grateful someone still asks. Nora kept her eyes on Harlan. Eli Hart is a ranch hand. Harlan clicked the cylinder into place. He did not look at her. He is a man with no debts. That is what matters. In the study, a ledger lay open with red lines drawn down its columns. Santa Fe Bank, final notice. Nora's stomach tightened. She could taste iron. He set the gun down and reached for his jacket. "You will stand at that altar, and you will say words. The ranch keeps its name." He walked past her. His shoulder brushed the door frame, but he did not flinch. The bell clanged again, a single flat ring that hung a beat too long. They kept the church dark to hold off the heat. The windows were narrow. A thread of incense clung to the nave. Eli Hart stood at the front with his hat in his hands, a quiet shape in a dark suit that did not quite fit his shoulders. He had sun lines at the eyes and a mouth that looked like it learned to stay shut. He did not stare when Nora walked down the aisle. He glanced once and then set his eyes on the small cross behind the preacher. The preacher's voice was dry and careful. It ran straight through the simple order. Harlan stood by the front pew and did not sit. Vivian's fan moved like a little white bird. "Do you, Eli?" the preacher said. "I do," Eli said. His voice had weight. It did not carry pride. "Do you, Nora?" She felt Harlan's gaze like heat at her temple. She answered, "I do." The preacher told them to kiss. Eli shifted for a moment as if something in him wanted to move, then shook his head a fraction. "You do not owe me that, miss," he said low enough that it was theirs. Harlan exhaled through his nose. Somewhere toward the back, a cough. When they stepped away from the altar, Harlan leaned to the preacher to murmur about papers and signatures. The sound of a lock turning. Coins did not clink. Nora did not look at him. Outside, the sun felt closer. Eli walked beside her and kept his hands near, not at her. He brought 2 horses from the shade and gave her the reins without speaking. The road out of town ran along the dry bed of an arroyo. Sky pressed down like a lid. The ride west was quiet. Their horses' hooves made the same tired sound again and again. Nora kept her back straight because her bones remembered that posture. Eli rode as if he had been born on a moving thing. He watched the horizon more than he watched her. "You could have said no," she said after a while. Dust salted her lips. He did not turn his head. "I could have." "Then why?" "Because a person ought to care what happens to you," he said. He made it sound like he was naming the color of a rock. Not pity, not kindness, fact. He took her off the road where the land broke down into a shallow basin filled with sage and piñon. Arroyo Verde cut a line through the brush. In the wet months, water ran. It was not a wet month. The cabin sat on a little rise where the wind could find it. One room, a stove black with use, a bed with rope tied square at the corners, a table that had seen a knife, a window with a view of dry light. "This is where you live," Nora said. It was not a question. "It is what I have," Eli said. He set her small trunk down by the bed with care. "You take the bed, I will take the porch." She looked at him. "You do not have to do that." He put his hat on the peg and rolled the sleeves of his shirt. "I know." He went outside to split wood. The axe bit and came up clean. The sound set a steady beat, and the beat settled something in her chest. She stood at the threshold with her hand on the frame. The wood was warm from the sun. Her palm remembered its heat after she let go. The stove complained when she lit it. The cabin filled with the resin smell of piñon. When Eli came back in, he moved as if he belonged to the square of floor between the door and the hearth. He hung his hat. He put the split wood where it belonged. He did not take space that was not his. "Evening, ma'am," he said out of habit. He corrected it. "Evening." She made a meal out of what there was. Flour and lard and a can of beans that had lived a quiet life in a shelf. She burned the first pan and swore under her breath. Eli took the pan, scraped it, handed it back, and did not smile more than a line. "Try again," he said. They ate at the table without filling the room with talk. Juniper Eli's sorrel mare moved in the small paddock and shook her head. Something brushed the porch. The heat let go of the day. Night slid in. When Nora lay down, the bed ropes complained and then settled. The ceiling had a stain shaped like an island. The window made a square of dark on the floor. Outside, the rocker creaked once. Eli's weight found it. He was quiet, but his breathing found its place in the house. She did not feel watched. She felt covered. She slept, and when she woke, it was because a bird had found the first seam of light. Eli's pallet sat folded by the door. The axe leaned like it had to hold up the wall. He was not inside. On the second day, she unpacked the few things that had not been unpacked for years. At the bottom of her traveling bag under a shawl she did not wear, she found a folded letter. Harlan's hand. Script picked into the paper by a man who had learned to write on account books. Be dutiful, it said, endure. She read it once and felt nothing. She read it again and felt the old house rise around her like fog. She took the letter to the stove and fed it to the flame. The paper curled fast and went black at the edges. It did not make a sound. The ash broke and fell into itself. She stood a long time and watched the empty space on the stovetop where it had been. Eli came in with a strip of leather and a handful of nails. He paused when he saw her face, then looked down to give her the choice of speaking. She did not speak. He set the nails down and crouched by the bed to reach under. The plank groaned. When he rose, he put a small tin box on the table. The lid had a dent that fit a thumb. What is that? She asked. Old things, he said. He touched the lid not hard. He did not open it. She noticed the leather string around his neck and the shape of a key tucked into his shirt. He caught her look and held it for a breath. Another time, he said. Nora touched the bed frame as she moved away. Her hand found a shallow nick in the wood. Knife marks, not decoration. Use. She found her brooch in her bag and pinned it higher where the lace had torn. The metal was cool against her skin. The afternoon heated up and then gave up. A wind came through and pushed the door against its hinges. Eli fixed the loose hinge without calling attention to it. The smell of creosote arrived before the light left. Somewhere far off, the church bell in town found a single note and dropped it into the valley like a small stone. When she went to the door, her heel lifted off the plank without sound. She stepped over the threshold and stood on the top step. The boards were rough on her bare feet. The sky had turned the color of a bruise by the ridge. Juniper flicked an ear and rested one hind foot. Eli sat on the porch rail with his hands slack and his head tilted as if he could hear water coming long before it showed its face. He nodded at her and she nodded back. No words passed and none were needed. Inside, she blew out the lamp. The room held a faint shine from the last of the day. Her eyes went to the tin box on the table. The dent on the lid waited for a thumb. She listened for the bell to ring again. It did not. The dark stood where it stood and did not move. Morning seeped into the cabin through a thin seam of light. The room kept the cool of the night. Nora rose, set a kettle on the stove, and stepped out to the porch. The air smelled like dust and resin. Eli had already stacked a neat row of split piñon by the door. The axe leaned where he had left it head dark with sap. At the creek, water lay low between stones. She rinsed 2 tin cups and watched her breath lift off them in the cool. The cold bit her knuckles raw. When she straightened, the world opened into pale sage and a long strip of sky. Somewhere far off, a hawk rode a wide circle. They ate in quiet. Beans warmed again, a heel of bread coffee, thin as river light. Eli chewed like a man who had learned to be grateful for anything that filled the space. When she reached for the pan, he handed her a rag before she asked. That small thing settled under her ribs. I can try biscuits, she said, if there is flour left. He nodded and slid the sack toward her. There is some. The first batch came up black at the edges. She scowled at the pan and let out a word she would not have used in the big house. Eli took the pan, scraped it clean with the back of a knife, and handed it back without a look that stung. Pan ain't hurt, he said. Try again. She did. The second batch held. They ate the small ones, buttered with lard steam cartwheeling in the cool kitchen. His mouth edged toward a smile, but did not arrive. When she caught it halfway, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. The day said its own work. Eli walked the fence line with a fistful of nails and a hammer that knew its job. Nora scrubbed the floor with lye that bit her skin. She rinsed cloth in the creek and wrestled it over a line between 2 mesquite. Her arms ached. Her back complained. Heat built and emptied in waves. The cabin took a breath and held it. At noon, she found him on the porch mending a boot. He had washed in the creek. Water still clung to his neck. His hair lay damp and a shade darker. He looked up like he had not expected company, and then made room with his silence. "If I fry salt pork, will you eat it?" she said. "Yes, even if I burn it. We will eat the parts that are not." There was no teasing in his voice. It landed like a kindness. After he went to the shade and sat with a small block of cedar in his palm and a knife that shone on the edge. The knife traveled, and the cedar gave itself into curls. He worked without looking at his hands the way a man does when he has done one thing long enough to trust it. Nora stood under the doorframe and watched the dapple of light on his forearms. The wood began to show something: a leaf, a stem, a sprig of sage. He sanded it with a strip of leather and blew the dust away. When she turned to go inside, he spoke. "For you." She faced him. He held out the pin in his open hand, simple, clean, the shape of a plant that made a living on dry land. "I do not need finery," she said more to herself than to him. "Not finery," he said. "Yours." Her fingers closed around it. The cedar smelled like warm earth. She fixed it into her hair, the pin held without complaint. Clouds shouldered in from the west in the late light. The wind shifted. It brought the bitter green smell of creosote. Insects went quiet. Even the hawk had moved on. Nora stood on the porch and watched the arroyo like a thing that might wake. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Eli tilted his head. "Not yet." A low mutter rose somewhere beyond the ridge. Thunder stacked itself on the sky. The light went the color of old iron. Juniper flicked her ears and blew through her nostrils, head high, the whites of her eyes showing in thin slips. "She is tied near the cut," Nora said. "Too near." Eli had his coat on before she finished. He stepped into the yard and then broke into a run. Nora grabbed a coil of rope and followed. The first drops hit the dust and popped like tiny seeds. The smell grew stronger. The arroyo began to speak at first in whispers, then in a voice that climbed. By the time they reached the bend, water had found the channel. It came fast brown with the land it pulled. Juniper yanked at the post. The rope was tight and high. The knot was one Nora did not know. "Hold the tail," Eli said, and put his hands to the rope. His palms slid on wet fiber. He put his shoulder into it. The knot did not give. The water rose to his shins and went colder as it climbed. He worked the knot with 2 fingers as if he could read it by touch. It loosened a hair. Juniper lunged. The rope cut across his skin and burned. He closed his teeth on a hiss. Nora threw the coil over a low branch and made a loop with more hope than plan. "Take this," she called. Her voice went flat in the rain. He did not take his eyes off his hands. "Not yet, almost." The nalga of the knot turned under pressure. Eli breathed once like a man in prayer and found the bite. He shoved his thumb into the eye and the whole thing slipped. He flung the free end over Juniper's neck and pushed hard on her shoulder. She jumped sideways, hit the water with her chest, then scrambled up the far bank. Her hooves chewed mud. She stood shaking head low, and the whites of her eyes faded back to brown. A log scudded past where Eli had stood. He lost his footing for a breath and went to his knee. The water found his ribs. Nora stepped into the current to reach for him. It took her at the ankles and made her small. She swayed and her heart climbed into her throat. Eli caught her wrist with a hand that shook and pulled her toward him. They slammed together. The shock of it took all air for a second. "Back," he said. His voice came out hoarse. He put himself uphill of her, took the rope from her, and braced against a mesquite trunk slick with rain. One step, then another. The bank chewed under their heels. They made the flat in a rush. They stood with their chests heaving and rain washing mud from their clothes. Eli's breath came rough and quick. He swayed like a man who had been up too long. Nora set a hand on his arm. "Sit," she said. He did not argue. He folded down to his knees and then to a seat on the ground, head tipped forward, rain running from his hair to his chin and off again. The world narrowed to the sound of water. The sky gave up all color. They got him to the porch and then into the cabin. She peeled his shirt from his shoulders. The cloth clung and then let go. His skin carried a web of old work and new scrapes. She set a towel on his back and rubbed until the chill loosened. He did not say thank you. He let her do it, and that was a kind of trust. She put a pot on for tea and dug in her bag for the small bundle of herbs she had found near the creek days before. Mint and something else that smelled like field after rain. She laid a blanket over his legs and set his boots by the stove to steam. The cabin filled with the smell of damp wool and cedar and sweet leaves. He watched her hands from the chair where he sat, knees open, fingers loose. The edge of a shiver still ran in him. His jaw was set hard. "You could have let her go," she said without accusation. She kept her eyes on the kettle. "Not while my hands still work," he said. When the tea was ready, she pressed the tin cup into his palms and kept her fingers there until she felt heat seep into him. The sound of rain thickened and then fell to a steady fall. Somewhere a loose shutter banged twice and settled. "You are shaking," he said. His voice had softened as if the temperature of the room had touched it too. "So are you." He looked toward the door. The rocker waited for him where it had always waited. The night was too cold for palleting outside. He saw that truth and did not try to step around it. "I can take the floor by the hearth," he said. "You will?" She said, not a question. She pulled an extra quilt from the foot of the bed and shook it out. The cotton smelled faintly of dust and lavender that had long since given up most of its strength. She spread it on the boards and set a folded shirt under one end for a pillow. Juniper moved in the yard, a soft thud of hoof and a snort. Nothing frantic now. The bell of St. Michael's did not carry across the wet. Rain ate sound and gave it back as hush. Nora sat on the floor and leaned against the bed frame. Eli lay down with a careful exhale and tucked one arm under his head. For a while the only sound was the steady burn of the stove and the small clicks of wood settling in the heat. Nora's eyes grazed the table where the tin box still sat. The dent in its lid caught the firelight. She felt the weight of it like a hand on her shoulder, not heavy present all the same. Eli shifted. His voice came low somewhere between sleep and the place before it. "Do not open old storms," he said. She did not answer. The room held them without pressing. The rain kept at its work. The fire pushed back the dark in a small circle, and it was enough. Morning opened clean, the kind that makes the world smell scrubbed. Rain had walked off toward the hills. Drops slid from the eaves into the dust and left dark coins that faded as the sun climbed. The cabin held a cool that felt honest. Eli slept by the hearth with one arm thrown over his eyes. The quilt rose and fell in a steady line. Nora set water on the stove and watched the blue flame take hold. The tin box sat where she had left it, its dent catching a thin slice of light. She did not touch it. She poured coffee and carried one cup to the hearth. Eli lifted his arm and squinted up at her hair, a mess from sleep, a crease across his cheek from the folded shirt he had used as a pillow. "You stayed warm," she said. "Warmer than the porch," he said. He pushed himself up slow and took the cup. "Thank you." They drank without filling the quiet. Outside, Juniper shook water from her coat and sent a small, wet storm into the air. A pair of quail ghosted through the sage, low and quick. The day felt like it belonged to them until it did not. Eli set the empty cup on the floor and stood. He went to the peg by the door and slid the string from his neck. The key carried the heat of his skin. He held it in his palm for a breath, then crossed to the table and laid it by the tin box as if he was setting down a tool. "If you want to know," he said. Nora looked at him. His face did not give her much. The softness that sleep had left there was gone, but not the willingness. She pulled out a chair. Its legs scraped the plank. She sat and put the key into the lock. It turned with a sound like a tick in an old clock. The lid opened a finger, and then the rest. Inside lay letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small horse carved from pine, and a photograph that had gone soft at the corners. She lifted the horse first. The knife marks lay clean on its sides. It had a smooth back where a thumb had rubbed it for years. "My mother kept that in her pocket," Eli said. "Gave it to me when I could close a hand around it." Nora set the horse on the table and picked up the photograph. A woman looked back, dark hair pulled simply, eyes that met the camera like it was a person. The background was a porch she did not know. You could see patience in the way the woman held her mouth. "That is her," he said. "Miriam. She worked for the Hawthorns." Nora knew the name. The Hawthorne place lay 2 valleys over White House and long fence lines, and a man who sent hired hands to town in pairs. She put the photograph down with care and touched the top letter. The paper had the clean grit of old ragstock. The ink had bled a little into the fibers. "Red one," Eli said, and his voice went smaller with it. She untied the ribbon and opened a page written in a neat hand. The letters were a little tilted, as if the writer had learned on a table that was never still. She read about a winter with no decent wood, about beans soaked for 2 days, about a boy who would not take to boots. She read a line that said, "Worth is not what they give you. It is what you keep safe when they try to take it back." Nora lowered the page. The air in the room felt thick and quiet, and she did not trust her voice. Eli leaned on the table with both hands and looked at the photograph, not at her. "My father was Mr. Hawthorne," he said. "He had a wife. He did not have room for another name on his letters. He sent money when it suited. He sent words when he needed to see himself better. He died, and the wife kept the land and the fence lines and the story that suited her." "The story," Nora said. She folded the letter in half and put it back with the others. "That I was something to be kept in the shade," he said. My mother did not agree. She taught me to work. She taught me to fix things. She would not let me learn to hate what I could not change. Nora set her hand on the table close to his, but not touching. She looks kind. She was, he said. His face changed and then settled. There is more in there when you want it. Nora closed the box and left the key on top. She stood. The chair leg bit a new mark into the plank. She moved past him toward the door and brushed his sleeve with her hip without meaning to. The contact felt like crossing a small stream. She stepped out into light. Work took the day by the hand. Eli pulled up 3 lengths of fence along the south side and reset them. Nora washed 2 shirts in the creek and slapped them flat on the line. Her fingers went numb and then came back with sharp pins in them. At the pump, she caught a nail with the meat of her palm. Blood rose in a clean bead and then decided to go farther. She sucked air through her teeth. Eli looked up from the fence. He came at a steady pace, not hurried, not slow, and reached for her wrist. His hands were warm, the skin cross-hatched with small nicks that had healed and gone pale. He turned her hand over and let the water run through. He shook out a clean cloth from his pocket and pressed it to the cut with his thumb. "Hold," he said. "It is small," she said. "It is yours." They stood with their heads close. She watched his mouth as he looked at her hand. He did not smile. He did not need to. She felt the press of cloth, the way his thumb kept the line of her heartbeat. The pain gave up quicker than she thought it would. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not anymore." He wrapped 2 turns of cloth and tied it clean. The knot sat a little off-center, like another pulse. He let go. Her skin felt warmer where his fingers had been. Juniper pushed her soft nose against Eli's shoulder and blew a breath that smelled like grass. The sky stayed clear through late afternoon. Heat lifted in shivers from the road. When a rider turned onto the track from Las Piedras, dust rose and hung in a ribbon behind him. Nora recognized the hat before the face. Sheriff Cole Maddox sat the saddle like a man who had done it all his life without thinking. His horse drank the ground. He pulled up by the fence, took his hat off, ran a hand over his hair to make the dust behave, and replaced it. Sweat cut clean lines on his cheeks where it had run. "Miss Vale," he said with a nod. Then to Eli Hart. "Sheriff," Eli said. He rested his forearms on the fence rail and waited. Cole looked from one to the other and took in their boots, the mud dried and cracked on them, the split wood stacked the shirts on the line. He did not look at the house much. Men like him knew where trouble tended to live. "Your daddy is speaking in town," Cole said. "Says the girl was taken. Makes him look better than the truth he has to sleep with." Nora felt her jaw set. "I walked out of his house." "I figured," Cole said. His eyes were not unkind. "Folks like a story with a simple villain. They will forget it when the next thing comes along, but for now there is talk. He is not poor on friends. I would be careful." "What do you want from us?" Eli asked. His tone was even. "Nothing," Cole said. "Just came to say I see what I see." He nodded at the shirts on the line. "She hangs her own wash. Hard to do from a cellar." Nora found herself grateful and then ashamed of the feeling. "Thank you," she said. Cole shifted in the saddle. The leather creaked. His horse stamped and shook flies from its shoulder. "Do not come to town tomorrow," he said. "Give it a day to cool. If you need me, tie a rag on that mesquite by the bend. I ride this stretch before sundown." He turned the horse with his knees and rode back the way he had come, dust lifting behind him in a thin veil. When he was gone, the road looked like a line drawn by a tired hand. Nora stood beside Eli with her bandaged palm facing the sky. He looked at her hand, then at her. "He will say what he wants," she said. "He will," Eli said. He went to the house, opened the cupboard by the hearth, and took the revolver from its shelf. He broke it, checked the cylinder, and then set it into the back of the cupboard and turned a small key in a lock Nora had not seen before. The sound was soft and sure. "There is no need to pull iron to prove a thing," he said. Nora exhaled. The tight place behind her ribs loosened a touch. She wiped her palm on her skirt out of habit and then remembered the cut and stopped. Eli noticed, and his mouth tipped in a way that was almost a smile. They ate when the light turned kind. Beans again, a little salt pork biscuits that came up right. They did not fill the room with worry. They did not pretend it was not there. They sat in it like people sit with weather shoulders near enough to share the same air. When the dishes were done, Nora stepped to the door. The threshold under her bare feet felt familiar. It gave back the day's heat slow plank by plank. The sky deepened. 1 star showed, then 2. The arroyo made a small sound where water still hid in hollows. Juniper laid her head over the gate and rested. Eli came to stand beside Nora. He was quiet. She took his hand without thinking. He let her keep it. They stood and listened to the land put itself to bed. The bell in town did not ring. The dark settled clean. The cabin held its light. The night asked for nothing more. Heat shook off the road in slow waves. The light went hard and white. A thin line of dust lifted on the far rise and rode itself toward the cabin. Nora saw it first and felt the breath tighten under her ribs. Eli stood from the fence and set the hammer on a post like a man who knows where to put things when hands are about to be needed for something else. Juniper pricked her ears and turned to the sound. The dust grew a body. 4 men and a woman rode out of it. Harlan Vale led coat-neat hat set low mouth cut in a straight line. Vivian sat a glossy mare and held her back straight so the feathers on her hat would not tilt. They pulled up at the yard. The horses blew and tossed their heads. Harlan did not greet. He looked past Eli and fixed on Nora like she was a mark painted on a door. "Come down," he said. "You are coming home." Nora stood on the top step. The threshold was warm through her soles. She set her shoulders square and spoke as if she was explaining the weather to a stranger. "I am home," one of the men snorted. He wore his gun low and his smile higher. Vivian's fan opened and closed with a small click. She let her eyes run over the cabin, the line of shirts, the stacked wood. "You smell like smoke," she said, "and lie." Nora looked at her and did not drop her gaze. Better than fear. Eli stood to one side. He did not try to take up the space in front of Nora. He kept his hands where Harlan could see them. Sheriff Cole Maddox came at a canter from the bend like a man who had hoped not to arrive at this very moment, and found himself here anyway. He pulled up and nodded, once eyes working quick. "Evening," he said. He did not soften it. "Mr. Vale." Harlan did not answer. "Girl," he said to Nora, "you shamed this family long enough." Nora felt her mouth go dry and found her voice inside it anyway. "You sold me to pay your paper. You did not shame me. You traded me. I walked out. I will not walk back in." Harlan's jaw ticked. He shifted in the saddle and the leather spoke. "You think this hand means anything to the county clerk. He is a piece of meat you fed pride to. I say you were taken." Cole eased his horse a step to the left and put the animal where it could block a straight line. He gave Harlan the sort of look men give other men when there are witnesses. "She stands there," Cole said. "Standing is hard to fake." A fly rode a circle by Harlan's eye. He did not blink. He breathed hard once through his nose. "Get down," he said to Nora, and the sound of it had the old weight of a father who had not learned his daughter had stopped being small. Nora stepped to the edge of the top step. The board creaked. The smell of warm wood rose with her. Eli's fingers flexed at his side and then eased. "She is not your property," Eli said. He put no heat in it. He made it simple. Harlan turned his head slow as if his neck had grit in it. He looked at Eli like a man looks at a fence he plans to cut. "You think a day and a night in a shanty makes you a man to me?" Vivian leaned forward on her saddle horn. "Boy, you do not even know your name." Eli did not offer them the name he had. He kept his eyes on Harlan and did not move. "Back your men off," Cole said to Harlan. "You bring this into gunfire and I will write the report with your name at the top." Harlan's hand found the butt of his revolver without searching. He had polished it clean that morning. The metal caught the light like a small sun. Cole moved his horse another step, but the space had already changed shape. "Do not," Cole said, and his voice left no room. Nora pulled air into her chest. She saw the day on the mirror, Harlan with the cloth and the gun, the ledger with red slashes. It clicked into place. She took one step down and put herself on the dirt of their yard. Her skirt brushed the top of her foot. "You can point that at me," she said to Harlan. "It will not take me with you." Harlan drew. The gun cleared leather and lifted. Eli moved before the thought of it had finished in him. He stepped into the line and set his shoulder where air had been. The shot cracked so hard it felt like the world flinched. Birds broke from the sage like seeds shaken loose. Smoke hung a breath too long. Eli staggered and bent as if he meant to pick something up from the ground. His left shoulder bloomed dark through the shirt. He put a hand to it and looked surprised not to find dry cloth. Nora went to him. Her knees hit dust. The sound of her breath made the only sound she could hear for a second. Cole was already out of the saddle. He took Harlan's wrist and turned it. The gun went to the dirt. One of the men twitched and then saw the sheriff's face and changed his mind. Cole planted his boots and put himself between the riders and the steps. "You are done," he said. He did not raise his voice. Vivian stared at the blood spreading into Eli's shirt. For the first time, her face lost its tidy shape. She turned her mare and backed her away. Harlan sat with his empty hand at his side and felt the air pull out of the yard. Inside the sound of the shot, Nora pressed the hem of her apron to Eli's shoulder and pushed hard. Heat and wet went through it at once. She pushed harder. The cloth turned the color of rust in rain. "Hold this," she said. Her voice shook, but her hands did not. Eli's palm covered hers. She felt the bones of his hand and the weight of it. He was breathing fast and small like a runner who had found the end of the road too quick. "I told you I would not let him take you," he said. The words came through his teeth like he had to pay for them as he said them. "Do not spend talk," she said. "Spend breath." She tore a strip from the inside of her skirt and wound it tight over the first layer. She tied a knot and pushed it down with the heel of her hand. Cole kept his body between the guns and the door. He looked at Harlan with a stillness that had warning in it. "Pick up that gun and I put irons on you," he said. "Get out of this yard." The men looked at one another like boys who had been caught with pockets full of apples. They turned their horses. Vivian's mare danced and threw a bit of dust. Harlan gathered up what he had left of himself and followed without speaking. The dust swallowed them as if the road had been waiting. Rain came out of the heat like a new thought. It darkened the porch boards in fast thumbprints. The first drops hit the yard and brought up the smell of creosote and iron. Cole bent, scooped the revolver by the barrel, and slipped it into his saddlebag. He looked back at Nora. "I will stand here," he said, and he did. He did not ask for a promise. He did not offer one. Nora helped Eli inside. The cabin took them in and held them. The stove kept a small heat. She eased him onto the bed and cut the shirt away from the wound with a kitchen knife that had seen bone. The skin around the hole had gone pale and slick. The blood was a dark red that did not care about carpets or names. "Look at me," she said. She found his eyes and kept them. "Stay." He held her gaze because she asked. She poured whiskey on the wound, and his whole body arched like a bow that had not known it could bend that way. He sucked air in a ragged strip. She pressed clean cloth fresh from the drawer and felt the pulse under it. The old coil of fear that had lived in her back for years woke and then found nothing to bite. Juniper stamped in the yard. The rain braided itself into a single sound that filled the room. Cole's boots creaked once on the porch as he shifted his weight. The bell in town did not carry in this kind of weather. Eli blinked slow. His lips went the color of the sky before a storm. He found her face again and stayed there. "Say it," he said. The words were small as a coin. She set her palm on his jaw and felt the rasp of his beard. "I love you." He let out a breath that had been waiting all his life and then another that belonged to this house. "I love you," he said. The words landed and did not break. His eyes closed and opened. She did not let go. She held the cloth and counted his breaths. The room smelled like whiskey and wet wool and cedar. The window wrote a pale square on the floor that shifted as the storm moved. Cole's silhouette filled the doorway. He nodded once like a man who had done the thing he could do and would not pretend it was enough. Nora tightened the knot and wiped her hands on her skirt. Blood made a pattern like a map she could not read. Eli's lashes lay dark on his cheek. His chest rose, rose. The rain went on, and the fire held. The threshold shone with a gloss of water where her feet had stood. Cole rode for the doctor while the storm worked the valley. The rain came straight and hard and found every crack. Nora kept both hands on the knot, pressing Eli's shoulder, her body leaning into the work like a beam holding a roof. The stove kept a steady fire. Heat and wet braided into the room. Dr. Silas Whitaker stepped through the door with his bag and a coat soaked dark. He had river-gray hair and eyes that did not waste motion. Cole took the chair near the door and became a piece of furniture with a heartbeat. Dr. Whitaker washed his hands in a bowl, shook them dry, and bent over Eli with the sure touch of a man who had pulled men back from edges before. "Missed the lung," he said after a look inside the wound that made Nora feel her knees, lucky as a coin in a pocket. He poured clear liquor and worked a needle with an easy stitch. Eli kept still, his jaw set only once. Nora watched the thread cross his skin and become a new line. They packed the wound and wrapped it clean. The doctor left a strip of cloth and a small roll of powder. He told her when to change bandages and where to look for fever. He looked at the damp boards and the locked cupboard and the set of Eli's tools and nodded as if the room had answered questions for him. "Keep him fed. Keep him warm," he said. He smiled once, a quick thing that folded and unfolded. "I have seen worse men live." Cole stood. He handed Nora a paper parcel and tapped the edge with his finger. "Sugar and coffee. The store owed me a favor." He looked toward the road and back. "Vale will not be back today." The rain softened to a steady whisper, and then to a fine hiss. The sound came from everywhere at once. Cole and the doctor left the door closed behind them. The yard smelled like creosote and clean dirt. The porch boards held a new color. Nora sat on the floor and laid her cheek against the edge of the bed. Eli slept the slow kind that earns itself. She could feel his breath in the mattress. She did not sleep. When light came thin through the window, the cabin felt rinsed. The tin box on the table held its dent and waited without asking. Days stacked like split wood. Mornings broke clean. Nora boiled linen and learned how cloth behaves when soap is lye and water is creek cold. She loosened the bandage with warm water so the wound did not open what had been closed. Eli gritted his teeth at first, and then let his jaw soften. He said thank you with a hand on her wrist that never kept her there. The fever teased and left. Dr. Whitaker returned twice and nodded at the color in Eli's face. Cole stopped by in the evenings with a paper or a sack of flour. He leaned a shoulder on the doorframe and talked about weather cattle prices and a stray dog that had taken to sleeping on the steps of the jail. He did not talk about Harlan Vale. By the second week, Eli took the rocker by the window, his shoulder strapped down. He watched Nora hang shirts on the line. The light caught in her hair and made a small halo where no preacher had put one. Juniper walked the fence and flicked flies. The arroyo held water in the deep pockets and gave it back to the air in a slow breath. They ate simple and often, beans with onion, cornbread when flour allowed. The biscuits came up right most days. When they did not, Eli ate the middle and left the sides for the birds. That small mercy made a space in Nora she had not known could open. Sometimes in the evening she read from Miriam's letters. Eli lay quiet and listened. The lines about Worth settled in the room like a third presence, not crowded, not thin. Nora liked the neatness of the hand and the way the words did not beg. She folded each page and tied the ribbon back with care. Work returned in steps. Eli planned a narrow board with one arm and his hips set against the table. Shavings curled in the sun like pale fish. The smell of cedar made the room feel larger. He cut thin pieces and sanded them smooth. He did not say what they would be, and she did not ask. The knife did its talking. On a morning bright as a new coin, Nora went to feed the hens and felt the ground shift under her feet. The world tilted and then straightened. She put a hand to the fence and laughed once without meaning to. It came out wet around the edges. Eli was in the yard setting a peg. He saw her face change and came quick without making a show of it. "What is it?" he said. She held both of his hands and placed them low on her belly through the cloth. Her voice shook and then found itself. "I think I am carrying." For a breath, the air went still. The hens made small sounds that meant nothing. Eli's eyes widened, and the look on his face emptied her of every old word that had dug into her. He let out a breath that sounded like a prayer spoken without a church. "They said you could not," he said. "They were wrong," she said. She laughed again, and it was not the same laugh as before. He set his forehead against hers and stayed there, hands steady, breath steady. No one spoke of plans. The ground under them did not need that kind of talking to hold. Spring put color back in the valley. The cottonwoods along the arroyo showed first leaves that flashed pale and then deepened. Eli worked slower and longer on a small project by the table. The pieces of cedar became a cradle with clean lines and joints that met and did not gossip about the meeting. When he set it on the floor and rocked it with 2 fingers, the sound it made was a little lullaby all its own. Neighbors began to stop at the gate. A woman from 2 ridges over brought eggs and stood in the yard with her arms folded and said nothing that cut. A man from the Hawthorne line rode by and tipped his hat at the sight of Eli on the porch and did not look away. The air around the house changed shape. It felt less like a line and more like a circle. Cole delivered a bolt of cloth from the store without saying who had put coins on the counter. He leaned on the railing and watched Eli fit a rail into the cradle. Town got tired of the story, Cole said. Found a new one about a horse that learned to open a latch. He looked at Nora's face and then at the horizon. "You two need anything you send a boy with a word." Summer eased into itself. Nights held heat. Days went long. Nora's body carried weight she welcomed. Eli kept his hand there like a man taking a compass reading. He spoke to the child without asking Nora if it made sense. She did not tell him it did. When the storm came, it walked in from the west with wide shoulders. Wind bent the mesquite and made the door complain. Dr. Whitaker arrived with his bag before the first hard drop. He laid out a clean sheet and set water on the stove. He did not fill the room with instructions. He placed Nora's hand in his and met her eyes. Breath and pain made a rhythm that did not care about clocks. Eli stood at Nora's shoulder and took what she gave him. Her fingers dug into his palm and he held fast. The storm shouted and then hushed and then shouted again. Time did what it always does in rooms like that. It went strange and then right. Near dawn, the wind let go. Rain softened. The room narrowed to a cry that rose thin and then found a stronger place. Dr. Whitaker wrapped a small body in a square of flannel and handed the weight to Nora. The baby's hair lay black and slick. Her fists made small knots in the air. Her eyes opened and looked at nothing and everything. "A girl," the doctor said. His voice had light in it. Nora pressed her lips to the damp forehead and let tears mix with rain on her own face. "Mercy," she whispered. The name fitted the room and stayed. Eli did not speak at first. He knelt and put one hand under the baby's foot like he was learning the shape of her. His other hand went to Nora's hair and smoothed it back from her face. His eyes shone with the kind of wet that has no shame in it. "She looks like us," he said. It sounded true. The storm walked off toward the plains and left the valley washed. Light came up slow and sure. The arroyo held a long mirror. The cottonwoods stood taller than they had the day before. Juniper stamped once and blew into the air and then settled. Dr. Whitaker cleaned his instruments, left a bottle and a word about rest, and stepped out into the new world. Cole came at noon and set a basket on the step. He peeked in at Mercy and grinned in a way that made him look younger than his years. He touched the brim of his hat at Nora and backed away like a man at a christening who knows where to put his boots. In the afternoon, Eli hung the cedar cradle from a beam with braided cord. It rocked without squeak. The scent of the wood filled the space above the bed. Nora pinned the sage sprig in her hair and felt the pin catch and hold like it had been made with this day in mind. Mercy slept with her mouth a little open and her fists quiet. Toward evening, they stood on the top step with the baby between them. The threshold had carried them and still held true. The yard glowed wet. The sky cleared to a clean blue. Sound drifted from town thin and bright. St. Michael's bell found the right note and sent it across the valley. It did not wobble. It rang and faded and left a hush that felt full. Eli rested his shoulder against the frame and looked out at the ridge. Nora leaned into him. Mercy sighed and turned her face into Nora's dress. The house behind them was small and willing. The land ahead of them did not promise and did not threaten. It lay there quiet and wide. They watched the light move over Arroyo Verde until the first star showed. The air smelled like wet sage and wood smoke. Their door was open. The room behind held warmth and a cradle that knew its work. The bell did not ring again. It did not need to. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.